Velociraptor leads lost human to safety. Then something incredible happens. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The dense jungle hummed with life, the air thick with humidity and the scent of damp earth. Ethan's breaths came in shallow gasps as he stumbled over twisted roots and ducked under low-hanging vines. His heart pounded in his chest, both from exertion and the growing fear that he might never find his way out. It had all happened so fast. One moment, he was surveying the rugged terrain from the safety of a research expedition helicopter, and the next, a mechanical failure had sent them plummeting into the canopy. Ethan didn't know if anyone else had survived. He hadn't seen the others since the crash. Now, he was alone, lost in a prehistoric jungle that felt more alive and more dangerous than anything he'd ever imagined. The sun filtered weakly through the dense foliage above, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Ethan's backpack was slung over one shoulder, the straps frayed and singed from the crash. Inside were the few supplies he had managed to salvage: a water bottle, a small flashlight, a multi-tool, and a notebook filled with sketches and observations from the expedition. His mind raced as he tried to remember the survival training he'd undergone before the trip. Find water, stay calm, keep moving, but the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on him. He had read countless studies about the creatures that once roamed this world, dinosaurs, but nothing could have prepared him for being thrust into their domain. A rustling sound to his left snapped him out of his thoughts. Ethan froze, his eyes darting toward the source. The undergrowth shifted, and a shape emerged. A sleek, agile form that moved with a predator's grace. A velociraptor. Ethan's blood ran cold. He had seen depictions of these creatures in museums and movies, but nothing compared to the real thing. The raptor was smaller than he had expected, its body lean and sinewy, covered in a layer of iridescent feathers that shimmered in the dim light. Its sharp yellow eyes locked onto him, unblinking, and its clawed foot scraped against the ground. Instinct told Ethan to run, but his legs felt rooted to the spot. He knew he wouldn't get far. The raptor was built for speed, its powerful legs capable of closing the distance in seconds. He held his breath, waiting for the inevitable lunge. But it didn't come. Instead, the raptor tilted its head, its gaze flicking past him as though scanning the surroundings. Then, to Ethan's astonishment, it let out a low, guttural sound. Not a roar or a hiss, but something almost communicative. It turned and took a few steps away, pausing to look back at him. Ethan frowned, his mind racing. Was it waiting for him? No way, he muttered under his breath. But as the raptor let out another sound, more insistent this time, Ethan felt an inexplicable pull to follow. Maybe it was leading him into a trap. Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the enemy he thought it was. Clutching his backpack tightly, Ethan took a cautious step forward. The raptor didn't move, its gaze steady and unthreatening. When he took another step, it turned and began walking, its movements smooth and deliberate. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before following, his heart pounding with equal parts fear and curiosity. The raptor led Ethan deeper into the jungle, navigating the terrain with ease. It moved with a confidence that suggested it knew this world intimately, every tree and rock familiar to it. Ethan struggled to keep up, his boots slipping on the damp ground, but he kept his eyes on the creature, unwilling to lose sight of it. He couldn't help but marvel at its beauty. The raptor's feathers caught the light in flashes of blue and green, and its movements were almost hypnotic, like a dancer in perfect harmony with its surroundings. Ethan had spent years studying dinosaurs, poring over fossils and theoretical reconstructions, but seeing one alive was a revelation. It was intelligent, purposeful, and, against all odds, it didn't seem to want to harm him. As they moved through the jungle, Ethan began to notice something strange. The raptor wasn't just leading him aimlessly, it was guiding him away from danger. Twice now, it had stopped abruptly, its head jerking to the side as it listened. Each time, it had changed direction, leading Ethan on a new path that seemed safer, quieter. The realization sent a chill down his spine. Was it protecting him? Ethan shook his head, trying to make sense of it. Velociraptors were predators, apex hunters of their time. They weren't supposed to care about humans or anyone else for that matter. And yet, here he was, being shepherded through the jungle by one. The raptor paused suddenly, its head snapping up as it emitted a sharp, warning call. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. In the distance, he heard a low growl, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. Something big was nearby. The raptor crouched low, its body tense as it listened. Ethan followed its lead, sinking to his knees and holding his breath. For a moment, the jungle was eerily silent. Then, a massive shadow moved through the trees ahead, and Ethan's stomach dropped. Tyrannosaurus Rex. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the towering figure of the Tyrannosaurus Rex came into view. The massive predator moved with terrifying power, each step causing the ground to tremble beneath Ethan's knees. Its mottled green and brown skin blended perfectly with the surrounding jungle, and its massive jaws opened slightly, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. The Velociraptor in front of him remained perfectly still, its body crouched low to the ground, eyes locked on the T-Rex. It emitted a soft clicking sound, almost like a warning to Ethan to stay quiet. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. His body was frozen with fear, every instinct screaming at him to stay hidden. The T-Rex sniffed the air, its head swiveling as it searched for prey. Ethan's heart pounded so loudly in his chest, he was certain the giant predator could hear it. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain still despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. The raptor didn't move a muscle. Its body was tense, every feather on edge, but its composure was remarkable. Ethan couldn't help but marvel at its calm under pressure, a stark contrast to his own rising panic. The raptor turned its head slightly, its sharp eyes meeting Ethan's for the briefest moment. There was an intelligence in that gaze, a silent command. "Trust me." After what felt like an eternity, the T-Rex let out a low growl and began to move away, its massive tail swaying behind it. Ethan watched as it disappeared into the dense foliage, his body trembling with relief. He exhaled a shaky breath, only then realizing he had been holding it. The raptor stood slowly, shaking out its feathers before glancing back at Ethan. It let out a soft grunt, as if to say, "Follow me." Ethan nodded, still too shaken to speak, and got to his feet. The jungle seemed quieter after the encounter, as though the presence of the T-Rex had silenced everything else. Ethan followed the raptor closely, his mind racing with questions. Why had the raptor stayed with him instead of fleeing? Why hadn't it abandoned him when the T-Rex appeared? And, most puzzling of all, why did it seem to care about his survival? As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but study the raptor more closely. Its movements were graceful yet deliberate, each step placed with purpose. Its sleek, feathered body was a marvel of evolution, perfectly adapted to its environment. Ethan had spent years studying dinosaurs in theory, but seeing one in action was like witnessing a living miracle. The raptor paused at the edge of a clearing, its head tilting as it scanned the area. Ethan waited, trusting its judgment. When the raptor stepped forward, Ethan followed, the two of them moving as a team. The clearing opened up to reveal a small stream, its clear water sparkling in the sunlight. The raptor approached the stream cautiously, sniffing the air before dipping its head to drink. Ethan hesitated for a moment before kneeling beside it, cupping his hands to scoop up the cool water. "Thanks," he said softly, glancing at the raptor. It didn't respond, of course, but something about its calm presence put him at ease. As they rested by the stream, Ethan allowed himself a moment to reflect. He thought about his research, the years he had spent studying fossils and piecing together fragments of the past. He had always dreamed of seeing dinosaurs in their natural habitat, but he had never imagined it would happen like this. Stranded, alone, and dependent on the help of a creature that should have been his greatest threat. Their journey continued, the raptor leading Ethan through the labyrinth of the jungle. They encountered other creatures, some harmless, like small herbivorous dinosaurs grazing on low-hanging leaves, and others more dangerous, like a pack of Dilophosaurus that eyed them warily from a distance. Each time, The raptor seemed to sense the danger before Ethan did, altering their course to avoid confrontation. Ethan began to trust the raptor completely, following its lead without hesitation. He even started talking to it, his voice filling the silence of the jungle. "You're smarter than any animal I've ever seen," he said one afternoon as they navigated a rocky hillside. "It's like you know exactly what I need." The raptor glanced back at him, its head tilting slightly as if it understood. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "You probably think I'm crazy," he said, "talking to a dinosaur, but you're the only one I've got out here." Despite the absurdity of the situation, Ethan felt a strange sense of comfort. The raptor wasn't just a guide. It was a companion, a lifeline in an otherwise hostile world. He didn't know why it had chosen to help him, but he was grateful beyond words. As night fell, the jungle came alive with the sounds of chirping insects and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Ethan and the raptor found shelter in a small cave nestled against a rocky outcrop. Ethan gathered dry branches and used his flashlight to start a small fire, its warm glow illuminating the cave walls. The raptor lay near the entrance, its body coiled like a cat ready to pounce. Its watchful eyes scanned the darkness, ever alert for potential threats. Ethan sat nearby, his back against the cool stone wall, the fire casting flickering shadows on his face. "I guess you're not much of a talker," he said, breaking the silence. "But that's okay. You've done more for me than I ever could have hoped for." The raptor let out a low rumble, its eyes briefly meeting his before returning to the jungle beyond. Ethan took it as a sign of acknowledgement, a silent understanding between them. As he rested, Ethan's thoughts drifted to the crash, the moments of panic and chaos as the helicopter plummeted toward the trees. He wondered if anyone else had survived, if rescue teams were searching for him. The thought of being found was both comforting and bittersweet. He didn't want to leave the raptor behind. "You saved me," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why, but you did, and I'll never forget it." The raptor didn't respond, but Ethan could have sworn its posture softened, as if it understood the weight of his words. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of birds chirping and the faint rustle of leaves outside the cave. The fire had burned down to embers, and the raptor was already on its feet, pacing near the entrance. Ethan stretched, his muscles sore from days of trekking through the jungle, and packed up his supplies. "Ready for another day?" he asked, pulling on his backpack. The raptor let out a soft bark, its tail swishing in what Ethan could only interpret as agreement. He smiled, his apprehension from their first encounter now replaced by a deep sense of trust. As they continued their journey, the jungle began to change. The dense trees gave way to open plains, and the air grew warmer, the sun beating down on the landscape. Ethan could feel they were nearing the edge of the jungle, though he wasn't sure where they would emerge. The raptor seemed to sense it too. His pace quickened, its movements more determined. Ethan followed closely, his heart racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew their journey was nearing its end. As the jungle began to thin and the open plains expanded before them, Ethan couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Relief washed over him at the thought of finally reaching safety, but there was also a pang of uncertainty. The Velociraptor, his unlikely companion and protector, had been his guide through the treacherous wilderness. What would happen when they reached the edge of this ancient world? The raptor's pace quickened, its movements confident and purposeful. Ethan struggled to keep up, his boots slipping on the uneven terrain. "You're in a hurry today," he said, his voice tinged with breathlessness. The raptor didn't respond, of course, but it glanced back at him briefly, its sharp yellow eyes gleaming with intent. Ethan could feel a shift in the air. The jungle behind them seemed quieter, the dense canopy giving way to wide skies and golden grasslands. The sun beat down on them, its warmth a stark contrast to the cool shadows of the jungle. Ethan adjusted his backpack, his gaze sweeping across the horizon. And then he saw it. In the distance, perched on a rocky hill, was a cluster of structures. They were crude but sturdy, made of stone and wood, blending seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. Smoke curled upward from a central fire pit, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Civilization? Is that a settlement? He whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. The raptor stopped, its body still as it stared at the distant structures. It let out a low, guttural sound, almost as if it were confirming Ethan's question. Ethan felt a surge of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was where he could find help, food, water, anything to get him back to his world. As they approached the settlement, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The structures were primitive, yes, but they were also deliberate, with pathways carved into the rocky hillside and small gardens tended with care. This wasn't just a random cluster of shelters, it was a community. The raptor slowed its pace, its movements cautious as they neared the edge of the settlement. Ethan followed suit, his eyes scanning the area for signs of life. The faint sound of voices reached his ears, carried by the wind. They were distant but unmistakable human voices. Ethan's heart raced. After days of isolation, the prospect of human contact was both exhilarating and daunting. But as they moved closer, he realized something strange. The raptor wasn't retreating. In fact, it seemed almost at ease. They reached the outskirts of the settlement, where a small clearing gave way to a narrow path leading upward. Ethan hesitated, glancing at the raptor. "Do we keep going?" he asked, as if expecting an answer. The raptor tilted its head, letting out a soft grunt before stepping onto the path. Ethan took a deep breath and followed, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. The first person they encountered was a woman, her clothes woven from rough fibers and her hair tied back in a practical braid. She was crouched near a garden, tending to a row of plants, but she looked up sharply as they approached. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight of Ethan and the Velociraptor at his side. For a moment, nobody spoke. The woman's hand hovered near a small blade strapped to her belt, her expression a mix of shock and caution. Ethan raised his hands, his voice calm but urgent. "Wait, please. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm lost. My name is Ethan." The woman's gaze flicked between him and the raptor, her brow furrowing. "You're with it?" she asked, her voice low and wary. Ethan glanced at the raptor, which stood calmly beside him, its tail swishing lazily. "I guess you could say that," he said. "It's been leading me, helping me." The woman's expression softened slightly, though the tension didn't leave her shoulders. She straightened, her hand falling away from the blade. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her tone tinged with warning. "This is not a place for outsiders." Ethan frowned. "I didn't have a choice. My helicopter crashed. I've been wandering for days, and this raptor," he gestured to his companion, "saved my life, brought me here." The woman's eyes narrowed, studying him intently. "If that's true," she said slowly, "then you might be the first outsider to earn its trust." The woman's name was Mara, and she was part of a small, isolated community that had lived on the edge of the prehistoric jungle for generations. She led Ethan and the raptor up the path to the heart of the settlement, where more people emerged to see the newcomers. Their reactions mirrored Mara's: shock, curiosity, and a hint of fear at the sight of the raptor. Mara explained that the raptors were considered sacred by her people, revered as guardians of the jungle. They were rarely seen, and when they were, it was always from a distance. For one to willingly guide a human was unheard of. "It chose you," Mara said as they sat by the fire that evening. The other villagers kept their distance, though their eyes lingered on Ethan and the raptor with a mix of awe and suspicion. "That means something." Ethan shook his head, still struggling to process everything. "I don't understand why," he said. "I'm just a researcher. I don't belong here." Mara smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's not about where you belong," she said. "It's about what you bring." The days that followed were a blur of discovery. The villagers welcomed Ethan cautiously, their initial wariness tempered by curiosity. He learned about their way of life, how they lived in harmony with the prehistoric creatures that roamed the jungle, respecting the delicate balance of their ecosystem. The raptor, meanwhile, became something of a legend among the villagers. It stayed close to Ethan, its presence both a source of fascination and reassurance. Children whispered about it in awe, while the elders spoke of ancient myths about humans and raptors working together in times of great need. Ethan began to see the jungle and his journey through it in a new light. What had once seemed like a hostile, unforgiving wilderness now felt like a living, breathing world with its own rules and rhythms. The raptor had shown him that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about connection, trust, and understanding. One evening, as Ethan sat by the fire with Mara, she told him a story passed down through generations. It spoke of a time when the jungle was in chaos, and humans and raptors had united to restore balance. "They say the raptors have always been more than just predators," Mara said. "They're guardians, protectors, and sometimes they choose to help." Ethan looked at the raptor, which lay nearby, its sharp eyes reflecting the firelight. "Do you think that's what happened?" he asked. "That it chose to help me?" Mara nodded. "I do," she said, "and I think it's because you have something to give in return." As the days turned into weeks, Ethan found himself torn. The settlement had become a refuge, a place where he had learned to adapt and thrive. But he couldn't forget the life he had left behind, the research, the people who might still be searching for him. One morning, as he prepared to leave the settlement in search of a way back to his world, the raptor approached him. It let out a soft growl, its gaze steady and unyielding. "You've done enough," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wouldn't have made it without you." The raptor tilted its head, its feathers ruffling slightly. Ethan reached out, his hand resting gently on its sleek body. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." The raptor let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a purr, before stepping back. It didn't follow as Ethan walked away, but he felt its presence, its silent support, with every step he took. Ethan walked down the winding path that led out of the settlement, his mind swirling with emotions. Behind him, the village began to fade into the distance, its fires glowing faintly against the growing dawn. The raptor stayed at the edge of the settlement, watching him until he disappeared from view. Ethan couldn't help but glance back, his heart heavy. He knew the connection he'd forged with the Velociraptor was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. A bond built on trust and survival, transcending the barriers of species. Ahead, the jungle loomed again, its dense canopy casting long shadows over the path. Though it felt less intimidating now, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this journey might be even harder without the raptor by his side. Still, the villagers had provided him with supplies, dried fruits, a sturdy water skin, and a makeshift map of the terrain. Mara had assured him that the jungle's edge wasn't far, and from there, he could likely find signs of modern civilization. As he pressed forward, Ethan replayed the events of the past weeks in his mind. The crash, the raptor's unexpected intervention, the quiet nights by the fire, and, most profoundly, the lessons he'd learned about trust and cooperation in a world that seemed destined for conflict. The jungle had become a place of transformation for him, and as much as he longed for safety, he knew he'd never forget what he had experienced here. Hours passed as Ethan trekked through the jungle, the air growing warmer as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The sounds of the forest surrounded him, chirping insects, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant calls of prehistoric creatures. It was a living symphony, one he had grown to appreciate during his time in the settlement. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. At first, it was subtle, a faint rustling in the underbrush, the snap of a twig that seemed too deliberate to be random. Ethan paused, scanning the jungle around him, but saw nothing. He told himself it was just his nerves, the natural paranoia of being alone in an unpredictable environment. But as the hours wore on, the feeling persisted. Then, just as he reached a small clearing, he heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down his spine. Ethan froze, his eyes darting toward the source of the sound. Emerging from the shadows was a creature he hadn't encountered before. A large, heavily built carnivore with serrated teeth and sharp claws. A Carnotaurus. The predator's yellow eyes locked onto Ethan, its nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. Ethan's heart raced. He knew there was no point in running. The Carnotaurus was built for speed and power. His only chance was to stay calm and hope it lost interest. But the Carnotaurus let out a deafening roar, its muscles tensing as it prepared to charge. Ethan took a step back, his mind racing. He glanced around the clearing, searching for any possible escape route, but there was nowhere to hide. He braced himself, expecting the worst. And then, out of nowhere, a familiar sound cut through the air. A sharp, piercing cry that made the Carnotaurus pause. Ethan's heart leaped as he turned to see the Velociraptor bursting into the clearing, its body low and its feathers bristling with aggression. "You came back?" Ethan whispered, barely able to process what he was seeing. The raptor let out another cry, circling around the Carnotaurus with calculated movements. The larger predator snarled, clearly irritated by the smaller creature's interference. But the raptor didn't back down. Instead, it darted in and out, snapping at the Carnotaurus's legs and tail, forcing it to divide its attention. Ethan realized what was happening. The raptor was buying him time. "Go!" he shouted, his voice breaking with urgency. "Get out of here!" The raptor ignored him, its focus entirely on the Carnotaurus. It was an incredible display of bravery and strategy, and Ethan knew he couldn't waste the opportunity. He turned and ran, his legs carrying him as fast as they could through the dense underbrush. Behind him, the sounds of the battle faded, replaced by the pounding of his own heartbeat. He didn't stop until he reached another clearing, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He collapsed onto the ground, his hands shaking. The image of the raptor standing its ground against the Carnotaurus burned in his mind. He didn't want to believe it, but a sinking feeling settled in his chest. Had the raptor sacrificed itself for him? The hours that followed were some of the longest of Ethan's life. He continued moving, driven by equal parts hope and dread. The jungle began to thin, and for the first time in days, he saw signs of human activity. Discarded debris, tire tracks in the dirt, the faint hum of machinery in the distance. He stumbled upon a research outpost nestled at the edge of the jungle. It was a small, temporary structure, surrounded by vehicles and equipment. Ethan's knees nearly gave out at the sight. He was finally safe. A group of researchers and workers spotted him as he approached, their expressions shifting from surprise to concern. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, rushing to his side. I crashed," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "The helicopter. I've been in the jungle for days." They guided him inside, offering water and food as they listened to his story. Ethan recounted everything. His survival, the dangers he'd faced, and most of all, the raptor that had saved him. "You're saying a velociraptor guided you through the jungle?" one of the researchers asked, his tone skeptical. Ethan nodded, his hands trembling as he clutched the cup of water they'd given him. "It wasn't just an animal," he said. "It was intelligent, protected me. It came back for me when I was in danger." The researchers exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. But Ethan didn't care if they believed him. He knew what had happened, and nothing could change that. Over the next few days, Ethan rested and recovered at the outpost. The staff arranged for him to be transported back to the nearest city, where he could reconnect with his team and report the crash. But even as he prepared to leave, his thoughts remained with the raptor. He couldn't shake the feeling that he owed it his life, and that their connection wasn't just a fluke. The morning he was set to leave, Ethan stood at the edge of the jungle, staring into the shadows of the trees. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "For everything." As if in response, a faint cry echoed through the trees. Ethan's breath caught, his heart leaping in his chest. He strained his eyes, searching the jungle for any sign of movement. And then he saw it. The raptor emerged from the shadows, its sleek body silhouetted against the dappled light. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its head tilted slightly as it watched him. Ethan felt a wave of emotion crash over him. Relief, gratitude, and a deep, unspoken understanding. "You're alive," he said, his voice trembling. The raptor let out a low rumble, its gaze steady. It didn't approach, but it didn't retreat either. It was as if it had come to say goodbye. Ethan took a step forward, his hand lifting in a silent gesture of thanks. The raptor tilted its head, its feathers ruffling slightly, and then, with a final cry, it turned and disappeared into the jungle. Ethan stood there for a long moment, his chest tight with emotion. He didn't know if he would ever see the raptor again, but he knew one thing for certain. It had changed his life forever. Ethan's journey back to civilization was surreal. After weeks in the jungle, surrounded by creatures that should have been extinct, stepping into the modern world felt almost alien. The hum of engines, the steady pulse of electricity, and the chatter of human voices were stark contrasts to the vibrant, primal rhythms of the jungle. The transport team took Ethan to a bustling research facility on the outskirts of a city. It was here that he was reunited with some of his colleagues, scientists and researchers who had feared the worst when the news of the crash reached them. Their relief at seeing him alive was palpable, but their questions about his ordeal came quickly and relentlessly. "What happened out there?" one of them asked, her voice filled with curiosity and concern. "How did you survive?" Ethan hesitated, his thoughts drifting back to the raptor. He knew how incredible the story sounded, but he also knew it was the truth. "I wasn't alone," he said finally. "There was a velociraptor. It helped me." The room fell silent. Some of his colleagues exchanged skeptical glances, while others leaned forward, intrigued. "A velociraptor," another researcher repeated, his brow furrowed. "You're saying one of the most dangerous predators to ever exist helped you?" Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "It saved my life more than once. It led me through the jungle away from danger. I wouldn't be here without it." The room buzzed with whispers and murmurs. Some dismissed his account as the ramblings of a man who had endured too much stress, while others seemed genuinely fascinated. Ethan didn't blame them for their doubt. It wasn't a story that fit within the bounds of logic or scientific understanding. But one person believed him, Dr. Lila Carter, a paleontologist who had worked with Ethan for years, pulled him aside after the meeting. "I believe you," she said quietly. "I've always thought we underestimated their intelligence. What you're describing, it fits with some of the theories I've been exploring." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "I know how crazy it sounds, but it's the truth. That raptor wasn't just an animal. It was something more." Dr. Carter nodded thoughtfully. "If you're willing, I'd like to document your experience," she said. "It could change how we understand dinosaurs and their relationship to the world around them." Ethan agreed. Over the next few days, he recounted his journey in painstaking detail, describing everything from the crash to the raptor's uncanny behavior. Dr. Carter took meticulous notes, her excitement growing with every new revelation. As Ethan settled back into his life, the memories of the jungle stayed with him. He often found himself staring out of his office window, his thoughts drifting to the raptor. He wondered if it was still roaming the jungle, guiding others or simply living its life. The bond they had shared felt unbreakable, even across the vast distance that now separated them. One evening, as he sifted through his notes and sketches from the expedition, an idea began to take shape. The jungle and the creatures within it deserved to be protected. The raptor had shown him that the prehistoric world wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a vibrant, living ecosystem that needed to be preserved. Ethan decided to dedicate his work to this mission. He partnered with conservationists and researchers, using his story to raise awareness about the importance of protecting natural habitats. The tale of the raptor became a rallying cry, inspiring others to see the interconnectedness of all life and the potential for cooperation, even between species as different as humans and dinosaurs. Months turned into years, and Ethan's work gained international attention. Documentaries were made, articles were published, and his story was shared across the globe. People were captivated by the idea of a raptor choosing to save a human, a symbol of the unexpected connections that could arise in the most unlikely circumstances. Ethan never stopped thinking about the raptor. He often wondered if it remembered him, if it had sensed the profound impact it had made on his life. Though he never returned to the jungle, he felt its presence in everything he did. The lessons he had learned there, about trust, resilience, and the power of connection, shaped every decision he made. One day, while attending a conference on prehistoric ecosystems, Ethan was approached by a young boy clutching a worn notebook. "Are you the man from the jungle?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Ethan smiled. "I am." The boy opened his notebook, revealing a series of drawings. Dinosaurs, landscapes, and a figure that looked suspiciously like Ethan standing beside a raptor. "I read about you," the boy said. "I think what you did was amazing." Ethan knelt down to look at the drawings more closely. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. "But it wasn't just me. That raptor. It was the real hero." The boy nodded solemnly. "Do you think it's still out there?" Ethan hesitated, his mind flashing back to the raptor's piercing gaze, its unwavering presence. "I think so," he said finally. "And I think it's still watching over the jungle." As the years went by, Ethan's story became part of a larger narrative, one that emphasized the need for coexistence and understanding between humans and the natural world. His work inspired countless others to pursue careers in conservation, paleontology, and environmental science, each one driven by the idea that every life, no matter how different, had value. Ethan never forgot the raptor. It remained a symbol of everything he had learned and everything he hoped to achieve. And though he never saw it again, he felt its presence in every step he took, every life he touched. One quiet evening, many years later, Ethan sat on his porch, the sun setting over a vast, untamed wilderness. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes still held the spark of curiosity and wonder that had defined his life. He gazed out at the horizon, his thoughts drifting to the jungle and the creature that had changed everything. In the distance, a shadow moved against the fading light. Ethan squinted, his breath catching in his throat. It was too far to see clearly, but the shape was unmistakable, sleek, agile, and utterly familiar. A raptor. Ethan's heart raced as he watched the figure pause, its head tilting as if it were looking directly at him. He stood slowly, his hand resting on the porch railing. For a moment, neither of them moved, the air thick with unspoken recognition. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the raptor turned and disappeared into the wilderness. Ethan stood there for a long time, his chest tight with emotion. He didn't know if it was the same raptor or just a trick of the light, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the connection, the bond that transcended time, distance, and understanding. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Ethan smiled. The raptor had led him to safety, but it had also led him to something far greater. A deeper understanding of himself, the world, and the limitless possibilities of connection. And in that quiet moment, he knew that their story would live on, not just in the past, but in every choice he made, every life he touched, and every step forward toward a better world. Here's the final batch of 1,500 words to complete the story. Years passed, but the memory of the raptor never faded for Ethan. It became more than just an extraordinary tale to recount. It became a compass guiding his actions and his legacy. His work had evolved beyond research and storytelling. It had grown into a movement. Through conservation initiatives, educational programs, and advocacy campaigns, Ethan dedicated his life to fostering a deeper connection between humanity and the natural world. One of his most ambitious projects was a research and conservation facility called the Sanctuary, built near the very jungle where he had been stranded. The facility served as both a refuge for endangered species and a hub for scientists, students, and explorers eager to learn about the prehistoric ecosystem Ethan had experienced firsthand. The sanctuary became a testament to the lessons the raptor had taught him. Lessons about coexistence, trust, and the incredible resilience of life. Visitors from all over the world came to the sanctuary, drawn by Ethan's story and the chance to glimpse the wonders of the past brought to life. The facility offered guided expeditions into the jungle, carefully monitored to ensure minimal disruption to the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Ethan insisted that every visitor leave with not just knowledge but a sense of responsibility to protect the world's natural treasures. One day, while walking through the sanctuary's visitor center, Ethan came across a display dedicated to his journey. Photographs, sketches, and excerpts from his journals filled the walls, alongside a life-sized model of a velociraptor. Children crowded around the exhibit, their eyes wide with wonder as they listened to a guide recount the story of Ethan and the raptor. Ethan lingered at the edge of the group, a soft smile on his face. He was no longer the young, wide-eyed researcher who had stumbled into the jungle years ago. Time had etched lines into his face and silver into his hair, but his spirit remained as vibrant as ever. As the guide finished the story, one of the children raised her hand. "Do you think the raptor knew it was helping you?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. The guide hesitated, then turned to Ethan, recognizing him immediately. "Why don't we let the man himself answer that question?" she said, motioning for Ethan to join them. The children gasped as Ethan stepped forward, their excitement palpable. He crouched down to their level, his gaze warm and kind. "I think it did," he said, his voice steady. "The raptor wasn't just acting on instinct. It made choices that showed intelligence, compassion, and even courage. It taught me that even in the wildest places, there's room for connection and understanding." The children listened intently, their faces glowing with admiration. "Do you think you'll ever see it again?" another child asked. Ethan smiled wistfully. "Maybe," he said, "but even if I don't, I know it's out there watching over its world. And that's enough for me." That night, as the stars shimmered above the sanctuary, Ethan stood on the observation deck, gazing out at the jungle. The air was cool and still, the sounds of the wilderness carrying faintly on the breeze. He closed his eyes, his thoughts drifting to the raptor once more. In the years since his rescue, Ethan had often wondered why the raptor had chosen to help him. Was it a unique bond, a rare alignment of circumstances? Or was there something deeper, an ancient connection between humans and nature, waiting to be rediscovered? Whatever the reason, Ethan knew one thing for certain. The raptor had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. It had shown him the power of trust, the strength of resilience, and the beauty of a world unspoiled by human hands. As he opened his eyes, a faint rustling in the underbrush caught his attention. His heart skipped a beat as he leaned over the railing, scanning the edge of the jungle. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, just as he was about to turn away, a sleek, feathered figure stepped into the moonlight. It was the raptor. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the creature. It was older now, its feathers slightly duller, but its presence was as commanding as ever. The raptor stood still, its sharp eyes fixed on him, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, Ethan raised his hand in a gesture of acknowledgement, his heart swelling with gratitude and awe. The raptor tilted its head, its gaze steady and unyielding. In that moment, words felt unnecessary. Everything they had shared, the trust, the sacrifices, the unspoken bond, was understood. The raptor let out a soft, rumbling sound, its feathers ruffling in the breeze. Then, with one last look, it turned and disappeared into the jungle, its movements silent and purposeful. Ethan watched until it was gone, his chest tight with emotion. As the night deepened, Ethan remained on the observation deck, the memory of the raptor etched into his mind. It had returned not just as a reminder of their journey, but as a symbol of everything he had worked for. The sanctuary, the conservation efforts, the lives he had touched. It all stemmed from that singular connection, forged in the heart of the jungle. In the years that followed, Ethan's story became a legacy. The sanctuary expanded, its influence reaching far beyond the jungle. Schools incorporated his lessons into their curricula, teaching children about the importance of empathy, conservation, and the interconnectedness of all life. Researchers continued to study the prehistoric ecosystem, uncovering new insights that reshaped humanity's understanding of the past. Ethan himself remained a constant presence at the sanctuary, mentoring young scientists and sharing his experiences with anyone who would listen. Though he never returned to the jungle, he felt its presence in everything he did. The raptor's lessons had become a part of him, guiding his actions and shaping his vision for the future. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan sat on a bench overlooking the jungle. The air was filled with the sounds of life, birds chirping, leaves rustling, the distant calls of dinosaurs. He closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his face. In his mind, he saw the raptor once more, standing tall and proud, its feathers glinting in the sunlight. It was a memory, but it felt as vivid as the day they had first met. Ethan knew he would never forget the creature that had saved him, guided him, and changed him forever. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The raptor had led him to safety, but it had also led him to something far greater, a life of purpose, connection, and hope. Their journey was over, but their bond would endure. In every action Ethan took, in every life he touched, the spirit of the raptor lived on.